The first sign that I was being erased wasn't a threat. It was a smile. A slow, patient, perfectly controlled smile from across the dinner table. The candles were lit, the wine was poured, the chicken was carved with care. My son laughed at something his wife whispered to him. And then she said it. "This is your last dinner here." No one gasped. No one objected. Because the decision had already been made long before the words were spoken. What I didn't know that night was this. The papers were already signed. The house was no longer legally mine. And my son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, had helped make it happen. But here's what they didn't expect. They thought I would break. They thought I would quietly pack my memories into boxes and disappear into a nursing home room with pastel walls and scheduled bingo nights. They were wrong. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a man who has built his life brick by brick is underestimate how much strength is left in his hands. Stay with me. Because before this story ends, someone will regret that dinner, and it won't be me. Welcome to my YouTube channel Moral Echoes, where silence speaks. My name is Oliver Grant. I am 64 years old, and I have lived long enough to know that a man can survive illness, debt, and even grief, but nothing quite prepares him for being quietly dismissed from his own life. Exile does not always arrive with a packed suitcase. Sometimes it arrives with a linen napkin folded neatly beside your plate. Sometimes it is delivered in a soft voice over roasted chicken and candlelight. And sometimes it comes from your daughter-in-law while your son studies the grain of the table you built with your own hands. "This is your last dinner here," she said, smiling as though announcing dessert. "You're moving into a nursing home." The chandelier did not flicker. The maple trees outside did not stop swaying. But something inside my chest cracked slowly, like old wood under pressure. The house that held my life. Before you decide whether I was stubborn or sentimental, you need to understand what that house meant. I built it in 1989. Not with cash inherited from wealth, but with overtime pay, blistered hands, and a promise to my wife, Margaret, that we would give our son stability. Margaret used to stand in the doorway while I worked, one hand on her hip, the other shading her eyes from the sun. "Oliver," she would laugh, "you're building like you expect it to outlive you." "I am," I'd reply, "that's the point." The foundation is reinforced concrete I poured myself with 2 neighbors and a borrowed mixer. The oak beams in the dining room were reclaimed from my father's barn. Even the stone fireplace was laid one piece at a time over 3 cold autumn weekends. That house held first steps. It held birthday cakes and exam night tears. It held Margaret's laughter. And later, it held her hospital bed. Cancer does not care about architecture. It eats through the strongest structures. When Margaret passed 3 years ago, I walked from room to room touching walls like a blind man memorizing his surroundings. Every surface whispered her name. That house was not real estate. It was memory anchored in brick. Daniel comes home. After the funeral, Daniel moved back in temporarily. He was 34, married to Clara for 6 months. "We'll help you adjust, Dad," he said gently. Clara hugged me tightly that first week. She brought casseroles, rearranged kitchen drawers, opened windows. She called it refreshing the energy. I called it coping. At first, I was grateful for the noise in the house again. Laughter returned. Footsteps echoed in hallways that had grown too quiet. But subtle shifts began. My leather armchair disappeared, donated to charity. Margaret's floral curtains were replaced with neutral panels. Family photos were moved from the mantel to a side cabinet. "Less clutter," Clara would say. I didn't protest. I told myself change was natural, that homes evolve. I did not yet understand that some changes are renovations. Others are erasures. The night of the announcement. It was Daniel's promotion dinner. Candles flickered. The good china, Margaret's favorite, was laid out. Clara poured wine carefully, ensuring every glass was filled equally. She thrives on symmetry. We spoke of Daniel's new position, the raise, the possibilities. Then Clara placed her fork down. Her movements were deliberate, measured. "Oliver," she began, folding her hands gently, "Daniel and I have been discussing your future." My future. At 64, my future was still something I jogged toward every morning at dawn. "We believe it's time you transition into assisted living." The words were smooth. "Practiced." I blinked. "Transition." "A nursing home," she clarified. "You shouldn't be alone all day. It's not safe." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I am not alone," I said quietly. "This is my home." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, we're just thinking long-term." Long-term? As though I were already a memory. Clara smiled gently, but there was steel behind it. "We've already looked at options. This is your last dinner here." That sentence did not echo. It lodged. The look that hurt most. I could have argued with Clara. But I looked at my son. Daniel avoided my eyes. And in that moment, something far deeper than anger surfaced. Disappointment. I had raised him to stand firm in storms. Yet here he sat, silent, letting someone else redraw the boundaries of my life. "Do you agree with this?" I asked him softly. He swallowed. "It makes sense, Dad." "Makes sense." I nodded slowly. Sometimes the loudest betrayal is quiet agreement. The folder. After dinner, Clara handed me a sleek gray folder. Inside were brochures. Bright images of elderly couples playing board games. Soft pastel hallways. Promises of community and security. A sticky note marked one page, tour scheduled Friday, 11 a.m. "You scheduled it without asking me," I said. "We didn't want to overwhelm you," she replied smoothly. Overwhelm me. I had supervised bridge construction over active highways. I had negotiated contracts with stubborn developers. And now I was too fragile for conversation. The safe. 2 nights later, something unsettled me. Clara's certainty was too strong. I went to my study and opened the closet safe where I kept important documents. It was unlocked. Empty. The deed. The insurance policies. Gone. A tremor passed through my hands. When Clara returned home, I asked calmly, "Have you accessed my safe?" She did not hesitate. "Yes, Daniel and I thought it best to organize your paperwork." "And the deed?" "We transferred ownership last year. It's cleaner that way." The room spun slightly. "I never agreed to that." She tilted her head. "You signed the documents, Oliver." And then it came back to me. Last year, a stack of papers labeled tax restructuring. Clara guiding me through them quickly. "Just sign here and here." Trust is a dangerous shortcut. The lawyer. Harold Green has been my friend for 40 years, a retired attorney with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. When I told him everything, he leaned back slowly. "Forgery," he said. The word tasted bitter. "She buried the transfer within unrelated paperwork," he continued. "Classic misdirection. Can it be reversed? If you're willing to fight." I looked at my hands. They were still strong. "Yes," I said. The nursing home visit. Friday came. I went to the tour alone. The building smelled faintly of antiseptic and artificial lavender. Residents sat in a lounge staring at a television playing a daytime game show. One woman clutched a photograph frame like a shield. The administrator spoke cheerfully about engagement programs. I watched a man in his 70s shuffle slowly past, eyes vacant. I am 64 years old. I still fix leaky faucets. I still read engineering journals. I still dream. Do many people come here by choice? I asked. She hesitated. That was enough. The breaking point. Sunday evening, I asked Daniel and Clara to sit at the oak table. I've consulted an attorney, I began calmly. Clara's jaw tightened. The deed transfer appears fraudulent. Daniel looked at her, confused. You told me he agreed, Daniel whispered. He did, she snapped. No, I said softly, I trusted you. That word hung heavier than accusation. Clara's composure cracked. You don't understand what instability does to a family, she burst out. I watched my father lose everything. I refuse to live like that again. So you stole security from me to create your own, I replied. Daniel buried his face in his hands. And for the first time, I saw fear in Clara's eyes. Not of me, but of losing control. Separation. I moved out for a week, not in defeat but to create space. Harold began proceedings. Daniel visited me twice, alone. I was afraid of conflict, he admitted. And so you chose comfort over truth, I said gently. He nodded, tears forming. My father never avoided storms, I told him. He stood in them. And I failed you. You failed yourself, I corrected softly. The reversal. The legal battle was brief but decisive. The signatures did not hold up under scrutiny. The deed was restored to my name. Clara signed the reversal papers with trembling hands. She apologized. It sounded rehearsed. But fear can humble even the most calculating voice. The final dinner. A month later, I invited them to dinner. The same table. The same chandelier. But this time the air felt different. Ownership is not only legal. It is emotional. I want something understood, I said calmly after dessert. I am not an obstacle, I am not fragile, and I am not to be relocated for convenience. Daniel squeezed my hand. Clara nodded silently. I forgive you, I continued, but forgiveness does not erase memory. A different arrangement. I renovated the backyard guest house into a private studio. Not because they forced me, but because I wanted autonomy. The main house remains mine. Daniel and Clara now live there under a formal rental agreement. Every clause reviewed. Every signature deliberate. Respect documented. What I learned. Humiliation is a crossroads. You can shrink, or you can stand. That night when Clara declared at my last dinner, she believed age equaled weakness. But age is layered strength. It is the wisdom to pause instead of explode, the clarity to act instead of react, and the courage to reclaim what is yours without losing yourself in anger. I am 64 years old. I still wake before sunrise. I still jog beneath those maple trees. I still sit at that oak table, my table, and drink my coffee slowly. Daniel visits me in the studio some evenings. We talk longer now. More honestly. Clara is quieter around me. Careful. Perhaps that is growth. Or perhaps it is awareness. Either way, I am no longer invisible. The moral. If you are aging, do not surrender your dignity simply because someone calls it practical. Independence is not selfish. And kindness should never be mistaken for consent. If you are younger, remember this. The hands you rushed to sideline once held you steady when you could not walk. Security built on betrayal is not security at all. My name is Oliver Grant. I am 64 years old. And the dinner they thought would end my story became the moment I remembered exactly who I was.